even though they were born here, they could have a sense of, well, actually, I do have a sense of belonging to Hong Kong or China. There is a little bit of a difference perhaps to people who were born and bred here or born and bred in Hong Kong. So we're creating essentially kind of a new culture.
Welcome to the Immigrant Experience in America, an immigrant human library, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants in the United States and around the world. Listen in as we add another story to our immigrant human library.
Hello, friends, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Immigrant Experience in America. We have here today Summie Yeung from the UK. Welcome, Summie.
Hello, Simone. Really glad to be here. And I'm so excited to talk about my immigrant journey and how that shaped how I am today.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, if you don't mind telling us a bit about who is Summie, your heritage, origins, what brought you to the UK?
Yeah, brilliant. So I'm originally from Hong Kong. My family heritage goes back to China and different places. So, as you know, China is a big country. My paternal grandparents actually lived in China in a province called Hubei. And when they were born, there was just a lot of conflict happening in China. There was this Chinese Civil War, there was this Sino-Japanese War. And they were born in a time where there was a lot of turbulence. So my paternal grandparents actually tried to find a better life in coming down south. And that's how my father's family ended up being in Hong Kong. I've never been back to China myself, but that was the story. We were kind of born and raised in Hong Kong, and so did my maternal grandparents. They were mainly water people. So my maternal grandfather actually spent a lot of time in ships and in boats and working on the sea. My maternal grandmother was a very kind person who raised a lot of kids, actually. Well, not always single-handedly, but there was a lot of kids in her household. So they were born into a big family. So that was kind of where my families come from. Both of my parents were born in Hong Kong, educated in Hong Kong. And I was born in Hong Kong, so did my brother. And both of us were raised until sort of middle school, secondary school. And the time had come when we were thinking about options. And my parents wanted us to explore a little bit more in the world. And at the time, it was very popular for people, especially kids of civil servants, to be taking bursaries from the government to go abroad to study. And I think UK was just one of those, well, naturally, a very popular choice given that Hong Kong was a colony of the UK. So we took the chance. I decided with my parents to go abroad to study on my own. And it was a very brave choice when you look back, at the tender age of 15, thinking about leaving your parents, everything behind you in Hong Kong, but going abroad almost on your own. I had my friend, a very best friend with me at the time. So I was very lucky to have her to accompany to go abroad. But even then, it was a very daunting kind of thing to do. So I went to boarding school on my own and with other people who are also perhaps from an international background, but some also locally were kind of brought into the same school too. And at first, I was thinking, this is going to be like Harry Potter experience. I'm going to love it. And I did. I did love the experience. But also, there were parts of me which felt there was some bits of me that was missing because I have left Hong Kong, I've left my parents. So I guess I just had this constant sort of dilemma of, am I here or am I there? Do I feel more belonged in the UK or do I feel more of a sense of belonging in Hong Kong? And I kind of struggled with that sort of paradox throughout my adulthood as well. But yes, that's, I guess, a bicultural me. But having kind of been here, worked here now, I think I feel more at ease of my identity.
Yes, after a few years, yeah.
Mm, yeah.
So before we get too far from the thought I'm having right now, I've always often wondered, can we talk about the whole Hong Kong situation and like, because I
Mm,
think people wonder and they just really want to understand from somebody who might be closer to the issue, like what is that? Like, I mean, the UK, Hong Kong, they turned back I think they turned it over to back to China after a number
yeah.
of years.
Hmm.
And where are things right now? Because I get the sense that I think there's an issue. Is it Taiwan that there's like uprisings going on? What's going on with Hong Kong? Where are we today?
Yeah. And I think, Simone, it's actually a really, really sensitive issue. And I guess I'm probably not the best in a way to be commenting on the issue because I'm not in Hong Kong per se. But from my perspective, it really depends on how you see it. I think for a lot of people who've recently migrated from Hong Kong into the UK, they see this as a political threat and a threat to freedom for those in Hong Kong as well. And that's why they chose to migrate because the situation's got to the point where they think, well, actually, it's a little bit unbearable for us to stay there because of the freedom and rights that were taken away. For some people who choose to remain in Hong Kong, they may not see this as much of as an issue. Um, and some people may see this as more of a, it's a need be because we were returned to the Chinese rule. And it was just inevitable that we were then returned to a policy that is going to be more controlled by China. So I think it really depends on how you see it. And me being having kind of migrated from Hong Kong to the UK, I see it very perhaps in a third way, in a way. And even my parents and my parents' in-laws have very different perspectives on this. So I think it's a very sensitive issue, and it really kind of depends on how you see it.
Yes. Okay. Okay. All right.
Mm.
All right. So perhaps somebody who's on the ground might be better placed to kind of
I
explain
I
that
would
to
say
that.
so. I would say so. And I think, this again touches on kind of third culture that we kind of talked about before, Simone, where I think, because I've left Hong Kong to become a citizen here, it's almost then I've created like a third culture for myself and those like me. And I think inevitably those in our next generation would have that too, because even they were born here, even though they were born here, they could have a sense of, well, actually, I do have a sense of belonging to Hong Kong or China. So, there is a little bit of a difference perhaps to people who were born and bred here or born and bred in Hong Kong. So we're creating essentially kind of a new culture.
Right. New perspectives on things, a more maybe broader perspective, maybe more open minded. Who knows what that might can be defined
Yeah,
as, right?
yeah.
So you came over for boarding school at 15. Tell me about that experience. Like, do you remember the first day you arrived? How did you guys get prepared for it? For people who might even be considering, oh, that's a cool idea. How do I even begin the research or get into a high school?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, first of all, we did some research on the grounds in Hong Kong, knowing that there are kind of fairs that were open to recruit students from Hong Kong or overseas to go into these UK boarding schools. We shortlisted a few that we thought actually has a good vibe, and also, we understood the admissions process, how that works as well. And I think the biggest thing that I remember doing was listing out all the pros and cons of going abroad to study with my parents. And I think that just had such a big impact on me because ultimately it is a big decision. And at the time, I don't think I realized the impact of that because obviously 20 odd years on, I'm still in the UK. And I didn't realize at the time, when I was 15, that that would have been the case. But we really kind of dug down into what it meant for me if I were to go to the UK. The pros being perhaps that I could explore a little bit around, just not just Hong Kong, but being in a different country. I could learn English properly. I could be immersed in the culture more so. I could, know new friends that actually I won't be able to get to know whilst I was in Hong Kong. And obviously there are drawbacks like perhaps leaving friends that I'm really kind of close to, leaving my family, my grandparents, and not being able to see my parents, for a prolonged period during my life. Um, and I think, thinking about it now, it almost seems a bit like, why would you leave? Because that sounds like, it's crazy to go abroad at that tender age of 15. But I think at the time I was filled with a sense of adventure. I wanted to do something different. I know that the Hong Kong education system is not one that I really loved. And I know that, by the time I get to the sort of GCSE equivalent in Hong Kong, which is like what you do in sort of secondary school, mid-secondary school, then you would, kind of have this massive struggle because there's so much pressure for us to do well. Um, and at the time, I was quite privileged that I was in a good school, but I also have really good academic results. But I feel like I would be pressurized myself to do well. So not so much coming from parents or society and so on, but I would have pressure for myself. I didn't really want that. So a big part of that, I think, was to do with perhaps a little bit of escapism, actually escaping from something that is highly pressured into perhaps a little bit of a lighter approach to education. But at the same time, obviously, I wouldn't have known what it was like to study in the UK. So as I landed, there's been a massive cultural shock. I think in the first term, obviously, I acknowledged how I miss my parents and all that I've left behind, especially in big festivals and so on. But yeah, I don't think for a split second I would have regretted that decision.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so how did you make friends,
Yeah.
adjust to, well, I guess you already had British English, so that was like you didn't have to like learn American English.
Well.
You had to. How was that? How did
Yeah.
you
So
transition?
that's really interesting. So in Hong Kong, we did learn English. I wouldn't say it's like British in a way. And even till this day, I think I've got people telling me that, are you American? Or asking me, are you Canadian or Australian? Because I do adapt actually my accent to people I talk to. And if I've watched too many American sitcoms that week, then I think I'll become more American than I am. So, I think it does change. But I think what happened is that when I kind of went, to this boarding school, I was immersed in English. And technically, in lessons, you're not allowed to speak in that language because others won't understand it. So even though I have other friends with me, who speak Cantonese, I wouldn't really use that on a sort of, lesson, in lesson time. I still use Cantonese to speak to some of my friends, in private. So I haven't lost Cantonese per se. But I would have used English a lot more than I had. So I think, immediately I would have picked up some accents and, things like expressions and so on that I wouldn't otherwise have known. I think how I made friends, I guess interestingly, there was a big, big international population in my year, which I think I was really grateful for because it meant that I felt less alone. Because I think if you were a student, overseas student, who gone into a school full of local students, you would feel probably quite out of the place, because people would talk about things like perhaps what they enjoy watching as a child, the cartoons they are accustomed to, or maybe like celebrities that they know, and you would have no clue what they're talking about. Whereas I think in my case, there was more of a sense of, okay, well, we're all from a sort of multicultural background. We could talk about stuff that we didn't really know about each other. So things like festivals, language, everything was kind of open, open floor, and everyone could kind of chip in to have these conversations. So I guess I was quite lucky to that respect that, I was able to converse quite nicely with other people in my year about my culture, things like why do we have instant noodles in our boxes and, carrying all of this to sneaking them in to the dorm room. And, snacks is always a great conversation opener.
Yes, yes. So you were boarding, so that means food was prepared and provided for
Yes, it was.
you on
Yeah.
campus. So you didn't necessarily have to go out and shop at the grocery stores and figure out what am I going to eat? I can't find the
Yeah.
ingredients that mom or dad used to use in their food.
Well, so yeah, that's really interesting. So the first term in the UK, I've grown 20 pounds because of the wonderful desserts that they were offering. And I guess, I'm very privileged to be able to say that they actually do offer food. But strangely, I think a lot of international students really, really miss their home food, especially like instant noodles and that sort of thing. So they have brought in a lot of food actually from their home countries, in holidays. So I think I was a little bit spoiled to have both, the best of both worlds.
very good, very good. So as you started on your journey then, I'm wondering like did your parents what were their parting words to
Mm,
you, at 15, leaving home, going to a whole
yeah,
new country by yourself? What were their aspirations, parting words for you, and like really what carried you through high school, like, at 15?
yeah, wow. I think that's such a deep and beautiful question, Simone. I remember my mother giving me a booklet that she handwritten a lot of kind of words and wisdom in. Now, I've kept that book. To be honest, I seldom opened it because I fear that I would cry. And I think, there's such wisdom coming from a parent, but at the time also you probably don't appreciate as much as you do now, kind of what, stuff that she's written and, stuff like that are just simple encouragements to me, like, oh, don't give up on certain things, or, if you were worried, do this, speak to others. And I'd say, I really treasure that, the sense of actually, they have my back, although they're not physically with me. And although it was hard to have phone calls even in that sort of day and age, we had to go to a phone booth, pick up a card to really, call them so that they could call back to kind of reduce the fees. And it's not as mobile now where you have mobile phones and Skype and all sorts of, tools that you could, speak to your parents with. Um, I still feel that they are with me, on a journey, and I'm always really keen to speak to them on a weekly basis about what has happened in school, how I made friends, and so on. So I think, that's been always kind of with me. I know that although I'm abroad, my parents have been following what I do. They love hearing from me, and I think that makes such a huge difference to my life.
So you did high school, decided to stay for university, I'm thinking,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
here we are a number of years with you having a family in the UK.
Mm.
Are there any highlights through those number of years that you'd like to share about the experience and how you adjusted, maybe challenges that you had along the way?
Yeah, yeah. I say I've been very privileged to be able to study here and be able to stay here because I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of immigrants face into is the visa challenge or, being able to stay in a country after their studies. I was very fortunate to be able to land into a graduate job after my graduation from university. So I started my career at EY, which is one of the big four firms, and in consulting.
Ernst
Now,
and
I
Young,
think
yes.
Ernst and
For
Young, that's
those,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
Ernst
yeah.
and
So
Young,
I started my career there. I think the biggest challenge for me was that sense of now I'm into the big wide world without really much support anywhere. Um, I think in uni, you have a very clear goal, which is to graduate, hopefully with a good grade. And in school, you have, a similar sort of goal. Whereas when you're working, that goal is pretty much set by yourself. So immediately I'm kind of thrown into deep end. And I think at first I was really driven. I really knew what I was doing. I wanted to do as well. I wanted to kind of explore and have variety in my work. But slowly that exploration kind of, I guess, slowed down a little bit. And I feel like I wanted to be more closer to people I love, for example, my boyfriend at the time. And, I wanted to be kind of more grounded and more specialized in my work as well. I guess the second challenge is when I realized that there are some more multicultural issues than I expected. I think throughout school years and even in university, I kind of stuck to people who are very similar to me. So people from Hong Kong, people from maybe like Cantonese province, Canton province in China. And we were speaking Cantonese day in, day out. My boyfriend's also from Hong Kong as well. So there wasn't that sense of, breaking through your barriers to get to know people from another culture, which I think, I could have done a lot more of now thinking back. But it wasn't until I started working at Ernst& Young that I realized how big this world and this ocean is. And immediately, I think I need to break through a lot of those barriers to get to perhaps assimilate or, be blended into the culture. And I really remember this time when I was out with my project team, who were predominantly sort of, white local people here. And it's not to say that they weren't inclusive, but they were just talking about things that were quite, like banter and things that were very kind of, British in a way. And I didn't really quite understand, but I felt compelled to kind of laugh at the jokes and so on. And until there was a rather inappropriate joke that's popped up, and I laughed. And I didn't realize until afterwards that it was a bit awkward. So yeah, it's kind of like, experiences like that that made me think, actually, have I tried too hard to assimilate myself? Is there something that I'm actually not, supposed to be part of that I'm trying to be part of too much? And these questions have started to bubble in my head. So I'd say, these challenges kind of followed me into adulthood and, into other jobs that I took as well.
Yes, I think we can all relate to trying to understand the football conversations, the soccer
Yeah,
conversations, or any sport that is not native to where we're from, that we
yeah,
don't understand keenly, or conversations, words that people use, sayings, slangs, stuff that was on TV the night before.
yeah,
Just really trying to connect and build rapport, and it can be challenging. And you find yourself just really losing yourself, that
yeah,
loss of cultural self in that
yeah,
process. So
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I can relate to that.
What was your experience on that like, Simone? I'm just curious to know.
There were a few years there that I just was like so focused on studying. I would come across
Mm,
people who were just, mean spirited or rude, and being a female from the African diaspora, I didn't quite understand discrimination or racism. And for the
mm,
longest time, I felt like I just kind of brushed it off
yeah,
and thought, oh, they're just a rude person, whatever. I have my goal and I just kept going and moving forward.
yeah,
until after a while I started realizing that I was not feeling like myself anymore. And that's what microaggressions and other things like that will have on you. They slowly kind of creep in,
Yeah.
and then you realize that you're not thinking the same, you're not as confident anymore, you just don't feel like yourself, and you just realize you're not feeling that sense of belonging that you had before. It's very disorienting, right? So,
Yeah.
and then I
Yeah.
moved away from my family, and I was in the DC metro area for a while, and I just remembered feeling like, who are my people, like who's my group,
Mm.
and then
Yeah.
in the US is quite interesting because sometimes you don't get welcomed in by people who even look like you.
Mm.
Right, because
Interesting.
they feel like you're from another place, you're alien to them,
Mm.
you might have other qualifications that they don't necessarily relate to. You don't really fit their whatever their schema is. And so
Yeah.
for a long time, it's very painful. And I mean, one of the reasons I started a podcast is because I just did not, I was going through some pain and I didn't understand what I was experiencing. And through
Yeah.
the conversations over time, I've started gaining the language to explain what I was feeling. Oh, so that's what that meant, and just really listening to
Yeah.
people. And so it's been interesting. Culture shock really impacts us quite a bit. I've heard it,
Yeah.
it can lead to depression, self harm, and things like that. So I think we
Mm.
really, people need to take it seriously. If you're just not feeling like yourself, like get some professional help. Try to
Yeah.
seek out people who are somewhat similar to you, so you don't feel like you're constantly in a space where you're like code switching or changing or feeling that pressure to just be somebody else and not really having that space to just relax and just be who you are. You need
Absolutely.
that break, right?
Yeah.
For people who are
Yeah.
listening, you really do need that, some sort of a community where you can just be and not have to worry about switching your language or switching the way you speak or trying to constantly work in your brain to understand what the conversation is, understand what people meant by what they just said or how they express themselves to you. It's very exhausting. And I got there and
Mm.
it really burnt me out. And so, yeah, that
Yeah.
was part of mine. But I'm glad I'm on the other
Yeah.
side of it. I have the
Yeah.
language now, I have better understanding, and I can relate to people who are in the middle of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you said there, Simone, is so relevant. I think regardless of where you've come from, you would face into challenges as such. And I think one big challenge that I didn't mention, and I think we talked about it before, Simone, is the sense of grief as well. So I think when a loved one has either passed away abroad, or actually if they have been, ill or not very well, that sense of grief for us who have been migrated to another country, that is immense, and not being able to kind of, the guilt of not being able to kind of spend more time with them, that is a very, very big challenge. And absolutely, I think, in that sort of space, I think we all go through this in one shape or another. And this is the time where you need to seek help and support from the communities that you're part of, or even from professionals who deal with this day in, day out. Because I think there is a stat actually that says that people who are from ethnic minority background in English speaking countries, or in the UK specifically, they face so much more of mental health issues. And I think that's really real because that grief is so, it's just a daily battle, isn't it, really? And I'm not just talking about that in terms of kind of life and death, but also the sense of loss, that you have left something behind, and those connections that you might have broken. And I think a lot of us, when we migrate, we don't think about this. And it's not until years later that this kind of bubbles up in our lives and we don't really know how to deal with it. And I think that's when, therapy, counseling, coaching really, really matters, because I think it really speaks to our experience as immigrants, and it gives you a space to really talk about what your language is, the words that you use, how do we even describe these feelings? So yeah, I absolutely resonate with what you said there, Simone.
Yes, yes, yes. Hoping that the conversation brings some clarity for people who are listening around the world. I'm curious to know, like culturally, how did you manage any expectations that came along with you being from Hong Kong,
Hmm.
largely considered, in the Chinese community? Like, I think every culture has its own like cultural expectation. Like, your parents may expect you to do certain things.
Mm.
For example, dating, that you can only date Chinese. You have to marry a Chinese guy. You have to be a doctor, for example, or a
Yeah.
lawyer. Like, what were some of those cultural expectation or pressures that came along with, you might be overseas, but we still have an influence on your decisions and how you kind of turn out in the world?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think for a lot of Asian people, may I say, that this a generational pressure is on them, regardless whether they kind of respond to it or not. And I've definitely have some friends who come from, for example, a family who are doctors and they're expected to be doctors. Now, thankfully, my parents haven't really been in that space where they kind of really pressurize me to do something. And they always gave me the choice. And interestingly, even my grandfather jokingly said once that, I should marry an Italian guy. But, that's not what I did. But, that was something that he was kind of open to, which is very interesting. But I do think the cultural pressure is there regardless. So even though my parents, see it in a very sort of open-minded way, I think I had pressures for myself because of my cultural upbringing. And I could see that a lot of my friends, for example, they graduated from a very, prestigious university and they would land into a job that's really giving them a very high income. And that's the default. So a lot of my friends have gone into finance, into consulting, worked their way up in the companies to become the partners or directors. And if you looked at LinkedIn for, at the moment, you could see a lot of connections I have are in that space. And I kind of gave myself the pressure to do so. I think as I started my career, to really think about, okay, so how do I climb the corporate ladder? How do I gain the most income in the quickest way? I didn't land in finance because I just thought that I might not like the environment, but I landed in consulting, which is what a lot of people would have chosen to do at the time. I think interestingly, that gave me a variety, which I really appreciated, and the capital that I needed to kind of later on switch into another job. But I think we could do so much more if we were thinking outside the box. And I think sometimes we bottle ourselves in to think about, okay, all I can do is maybe something in finance or something in consulting, something in accounting, something that's kind of more, professional in a way that would gain us the income. But ultimately, the life is yours. And if we don't do what we're passionate in or, are good at or enjoy doing, then we could be losing time. And I think, we work for 80 to 90,000 hours in our lifetime if we're lucky enough to get to old age. So think about the time that you have been used in your job. And if you've been using so much time in your job, why not choose to do something that you're genuinely passionate about or has an impact on others that you would later see, yeah, I've done the right thing. So I think, I had to really shift from the Asian mindset, the values of kind of prosperity and stability to get to where I am today. And I think I still kind of, battle with that on a daily basis as I, go onto social media or even talk to my friends who are from a very Asian background and perhaps, then went into a job with very high income. But I think, it is a constant calibration of ourselves and constant calibration of where our values stand.
Yes, yes, yes. As I listen to you speak, I'm thinking, we come over. For me, I say the US, UK, Canada, or any other
Mm,
place that people are migrating to is the place that we come to find ourselves, right?
yes.
Because
Mm.
I think in collectivist cultures, we're so enmeshed in a community
Yeah.
dynamic that sometimes when we leave, we don't even know what is self. I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
in sitting in my undergrad class and hearing the term self-interest and
Mm.
being completely lost. Like, what in the world is that? It took me
Wow.
a while to really understand and start learning to think of myself and my decisions and things that
Mm.
concern me. Like, how
Yeah.
does this impact my self-interest? And I think when you're in the West, which is way more individualistic than a lot of places we are from, it's important that you learn that really.
Yeah.
If children in the US and UK are taught from a young age how to, what are you going to be, learn to describe what is your unique skill, what are you bringing to the marketplace. And so we come to this like way later in life, and we have to now figure
Yeah.
out, like, what is this, what is
Yeah.
self, what do I
Yeah.
bring, what is my special unique talent. And
Yeah.
it can be quite a thing finding
Yeah.
out who you are, what is the self. your own personal desires, and then managing them with the cultural expectations of having social impact and achieving so you can have social impact on your community.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's quite a discovery that a lot of people go on. And I think we're very privileged
Mm,
to be able to leave that collectivist world and now in the individualistic world to figure out who we are
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
define boundaries around like what is Simone's, what is Sumi's, and then I have these entanglements or connections with these other people who also add to my joy.
Mm,
Well, how do I now behave in relation to them in a
yeah,
healthy way? Because sometimes it can
yeah,
get quite unhealthy, right? I
yeah,
wonder,
yeah,
have you ever kind of thought about that, and how have you kind of balanced,
yeah, yeah.
Sumi's
Yeah.
world?
Yeah, no, I love that illustration of collect collectivistic approaches to the individualistic approaches. And it's interesting because as you were saying, as you were talking, I was thinking about, the heritage in Hong Kong, and actually Hong Kong being a colonized place before, I think has a mixture of both. Where I think traditionally, and especially if you look at my grandfather's generation, that would be a very I can't read collectivistic culture where everyone was looking out for each other. My grandmother was looking out for neighbors and taking care of neighbors' kids, and it was just a norm. It was such a normal thing to do in that day and age. But I think as my parents' generation kind of grew and our generation was born, that became a little bit more individualistic. And as I came here, it was still a cultural shock, believe it or not, because even though I was kind of semi, I guess, individualistic, I think the sense of confidence isn't quite there as we migrate to another country. And it's really interesting when you're talking about, actually thinking about, how people are educated here. What I found is that people who are educated in the UK system are much more confident about speaking of themselves. And I think people in Asia in general, especially if you're East Asian, you're not really told to speak about yourself because the value of modesty and humility trumps it all. And if you're really found kind of, boasting about yourself or talking about yourself in a way that seems almost like, selling yourself, then it becomes a little bit like, frowned upon. And people would kind of go, oh, she's just being a bit of a hmm. And yeah, I just don't think people like it as much. Whereas I think in here, I think a lot of people are really used to that from a very young age. You go to show and tells and bring out stuff that you're really passionate about and you really talk about it. And I think as East Asians, we really need to be trained up on that because storytelling is such a technique and such a skill that you would need to use everywhere. If you wanted to make impact in the world, you need to storytell. If you wanted people to understand your culture, you need to storytell. So there's so much more to that skill that we haven't really harnessed in our culture. But yeah, it's definitely a cultural shock when I came here to study and also to work. I found myself sometimes speechless, and that really helped. That didn't really help me gain confidence as I started working here as well. So I really had to kind of polish my skill in speaking and also, being standing up for myself essentially. Yeah,
That assertiveness that you need to survive and thrive, right?
yeah,
To get
exactly.
people to
Yeah,
take you seriously, to see you as being credible, and all of
yep,
this, you have to learn a lot of skills
yeah,
and
yeah,
become this person. It's a new person, really.
hmm
But then you go home and you still have to balance the communal world and all the connections that you have with people.
yeah,
So it's like we're
yeah,
we're using our brain in so many ways, so many skills that I think you learn. I really call it the superpower of being a
yeah,
hybrid of the collectivist and the individualistic. And now you're this third culture person,
hmm
and you really can relate to both worlds. It's been like drinking from a fire hose for you, and
yeah.
you go through this sort of metamorphosis, kind of like, I don't know if you've ever heard the book The Alchemist. You
Oh,
know,
okay. Yeah.
I call it this like immigrant alchemist experience where you're just, you're changing into something else and you become this butterfly. And I
Mm,
really do think people in this space are quite skilled to relate to the old world, the new world, and then also create more of a balance in the middle. So, um,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
so quite a talent I think we've developed here, like unintentionally. I don't really know that when people leave that they think about the other side of who you're going to become, but I think that's what we end up becoming.
Yeah.
Join us again next time for part 2 of this episode. We thank our listeners around the world, and we appreciate your continued support as we build our human library. Please remember to give us a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, and circle of influence.